said she spent 258 days on the road last year. I gasped, oh my God, how do you do that? I do maybe 30 or 40 days a year speaking. But however she does it, I'm sure glad she is. Because I can see how important her role is in building this grassroots movement, a really inspirational story. Just briefly, I want to get to the most important part, I think, which is hearing from you all, with your ideas and discussion that can lead to building from the grassroots up here in the Colorado Springs region as part of a statewide effort. So I'm going to comment pretty briefly on a couple of topics of personal interest and experience to me. One is that ReclaimDemocracy.org actually started in Colorado back in the late 1990s. And in 2001, 2002, we were part of a statewide coalition that passed Amendment 27. This was a statewide ballot initiative that put together one of the strongest packages of campaign reforms in the country. It included limitations on campaign contributions and spending, but also explicitly prohibited corporations and unions from directly making Treasury fund contributions to fund political campaigns. Passed with 2-to-1 support from Colorado voters, overwhelming support, despite, of course, many much more powerful interests being opposed to us. Common Cause and the League of Women Voters, the Rocky Mountain Peace and Justice Center, and several other organizations were part of this coalition that worked for a couple of years, put in tens of thousands of volunteer hours to make this happen. And just weeks after the U.S. Supreme Court handed down its ruling in Citizens United, the Colorado Supreme Court said, uh-oh, the U.S. Supreme Court won't let us have democracy in Colorado anymore. They struck down that component of Amendment 27. So the people of Colorado, you don't have the right to set your own laws for how elections are run. You are living in the illusion of democracy, not in a democracy, is effectively what the court was saying. So, some folks say, well, can people legalize democracy? What do you mean, legalize democracy? That's exactly what's happening here in Colorado. That's what your Supreme Court is telling you. That the folks, those 9 justices in Washington, D.C., have more right to govern elections in your state than you do. So this is a problem that's going on across the country. Half of the states in the Union had similar laws. Montana, where we're based now with Reclaim Democracy, is one of them, dating back to just after the turn of the century, when Montana was essentially a serfdom of the giant mineral mining corporations, literally controlling who got elected at the state level. Montana voters also passed via ballot initiative a very similar amendment preventing corporations from making ballot contributions and election contributions, and we're now faced with that same challenge. There's a lawsuit pending in Montana as we speak. And hopefully what we might be able to inspire is, while building this movement to amend the Constitution, also inspire some real grassroots rebellion. For the people of Montana, perhaps, or some other state maybe will be the first to stand up and say, no. We are not going to cede sovereignty to the Supreme Court. The Constitution proposes co-equal branches of government, not one group of unelected officials being the ultimate arbiter of what's legal and what's not. So this brings up, a lot of difficult issues. And I'm not saying this is the path we need to go. But these are the kind of questions that we need to be asking in our communities and national dialogues. We need to be questioning just about everything about the legal structure that, as Ricky said, is leading us down the path to what I think is an appropriate term, a suicide economy. Lori mentioned that part of my work not only is as a democracy activist, but as an advocate for local independent businesses and entrepreneurs. And while often in the media you might hear this kind of question that's being addressed in Citizens United as a pro-business perspective versus the others, I would argue very strongly that the pro-business perspective is to return corporations to being strictly business entities. That actual competitive markets and a free market economy, which I very much believe in, with certain limits to protect the environment, protect workers and others, is a very good thing. But that's not what we have. The corporate capitalism, as Ricky aptly described, is not allowing small independent businesses to compete on a level playing field. It's allowing corporations to take their vast monetary power and translate that into political power. And when you allow that to happen, you preclude the possibility of democracy. And that allows the Home Depots of the world, the Cabela's of the world, the Walmarts of the world, to systematically stack the deck in their favor, so that they're evading paying their fair share of taxes, so that they're getting public subsidies to build sprawl development on the edge of towns while your downtown businesses are actually left to compete in the so-called free market. But effectively, when your competitors are given these overwhelming advantages, you're not in a fair competition. You're being handicapped. The buy.coms and the Amazon.coms of the world are exempted by virtue of Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution, the Commerce Clause of the Constitution, to effectively mandate discriminating against independent businesses in any form that actually have physical locations from competing in a level playing field, because they're forced to collect sales tax while these internet corporations are exempted from collecting it. In most states that amounts to a 7 or 8% handicap. How many of you are involved in operating a small business as a manager or owner or anything else? So think about your closest competitor suddenly being handed an 8% advantage by government entities. How likely would it be that you can succeed? It's pretty difficult. And it is very much that difficult for many independent business owners, such as bookstores, music stores, and others, that are competing in that way to compete. So a couple of other quick mentions. There's been a lot in the news recently about corporate crime leading to a lot of deaths. And we have quite a history of serious corporate crimes that are killing people in large numbers, going largely unpunished. And so when we learn about the Toyota Corporation ignoring overwhelming evidence that they knew people were likely to die as a result of problems with their vehicles and deciding not to do anything about it until forced to, there's a good reason for that. Because just a few years ago, the Ford Motor Company and the Firestone Corporation, they knew that the combination of very tippy vehicles and poor tires were leading to many people dying. Dozens, we learned, only through civil lawsuits that forced them to expose the evidence that they had tried to conceal by continually settling private lawsuits time after time. And then a decade or two before that, again, the Ford Motor Company with the Ford Pinto. Ford executives knew very well that people were being killed repeatedly as a result of faulty gas tanks that caused the vehicles to explode when involved in rear impact collisions. But the penalties were tax-deductible fines. Nobody went to jail. There was no meaningful punishment to the people who were ultimately responsible for making those decisions that maintaining our profit margin is more valuable than human life.